She handed me the note like it was nothing, like it was a grocery list or a reminder about trash day. Her fingers were still slightly sticky from the lemon bars she had spent half the afternoon making, and when I took the folded paper from her hand, she looked away immediately. The way you do when you are embarrassed about something you cannot take back. This stays between us, she said quietly, and then she walked back across the yard to her side of the fence before I could even open my mouth. I stood there at the edge of my patio, holding a square of folded notebook paper, the smell of charcoal and sunscreen still in the air. The last of the summer sun cutting sideways through the oak trees. The neighborhood had gone quiet, the kids were gone, the lawn chairs were folded, the red paper plates were stuffed in a trash bag by the gate. And I was standing there alone, holding a note from my neighbor, feeling something I had not felt in years, which is probably why I stood there so long before I opened it. My name is Daniel Marsh. I am 43 years old. I work as a structural engineer for a mid-sized firm that designs bridges and overpasses and other things people drive over without thinking about. I live in a pale yellow house on a corner lot in a quiet neighborhood outside of Raleigh, North Carolina. I have one dog, a 7-year-old beagle named Chester, who is afraid of ceiling fans and deeply in love with anyone carrying food. I have a small vegetable garden I started 2 summers ago that mostly produces zucchini I do not know what to do with. I have a workshop in my garage where I build furniture I will never sell and carve small things from scrap wood when I cannot sleep. And for 3 years before that note, I had been quietly, privately, stubbornly alone. My marriage to Claire ended not with a fight or a betrayal or anything dramatic enough to explain clearly at dinner parties. It ended slowly, the way old paint peels, so gradually you almost miss the moment the wall starts showing through. We married young, had no children because we could not agree on timing, and by the time we were both 40. We had become 2 people who were very good at being polite to each other and very bad at being honest. She moved to Portland, I stayed in Raleigh. We divided our things with the efficiency of people who had stopped caring about most of them anyway. I was not destroyed by the divorce. That was the part that quietly destroyed me. I thought I should have been more broken. Instead, I felt mostly relieved and then immediately guilty about the relief and then very, very tired. I moved into the yellow house 16 months after the divorce was finalized. I chose it because of the corner lot, which meant fewer shared walls. And because the previous owner had left a beautiful built-in bookshelf in the living room that I did not have the heart to take apart. I chose it also because it had a large yard. And I thought a large yard would give me something to do with my hands that was not sitting on the couch wondering if I had wasted the best years of my life. My neighbor to the west was a retired couple who grew roses and argued cheerfully about sports. My neighbor across the street was a young family I waved to but rarely spoke with. And the house directly to my left, separated from my yard by a wooden fence I had repaired last April, belonged to a woman named Simone Aubrey. I did not know much about Simone when I moved in. She had been in the neighborhood about 2 years longer than me. She was quiet but not unfriendly. She had dark hair she usually kept pulled back, and she drove a dusty green station wagon she clearly loved more than it deserved. She taught middle school English, I learned eventually, at a school about 4 miles away. She had a habit of sitting on her back porch in the evenings with a book and a glass of something cold. And occasionally we would nod at each other across the fence with the mutual respect of 2 people who both understood the value of being left alone. We became neighbors the way good neighbors do, slowly, without pressure. She helped me carry bags in from my car one afternoon when I had both hands full. I helped her when a branch came down in her yard after a storm and she could not lift it by herself. I learned she took her coffee with oat milk and no sugar. She learned that I built things from wood when I was restless because she could hear the sander some nights. One evening she called over the fence to tell me Chester had gotten out through a gap in the boards and was sitting on her porch looking very satisfied with himself. I patched the gap the next morning. She left a container of cookies on my porch the day after. We were, in the precise and careful language of adults who have both been hurt before, friendly. The neighborhood barbecue was an annual thing organized by the retired couple next door, Carl and Margaret. Margaret ran it like a military operation disguised as a casual afternoon. There were assigned dishes, a sign-up sheet for the folding tables, and a carefully managed charcoal situation that Carl took very seriously. It happened every year on the third Saturday of August, and the whole block turned out because nobody wanted to explain to Margaret why they had not. This year I brought smoked ribs and a pasta salad I had made from a recipe my mother used to prepare for summer Sundays. It was the first time in 3 years I had made that pasta salad, and I felt the fact of that quietly, the way you feel a bruise when you press it and are surprised it still hurts. Simone brought the lemon bars. I noticed her the way you notice someone you see every day differently when they are in a different setting. She was wearing a light blue dress and she had left her hair down, which I had not seen before, and she was laughing at something Margaret said with the kind of laugh that is entirely unguarded. She looked in a way I could not immediately explain at home, not at the party, just in the world, like she fit into it without effort. I told myself I was just observing. That is what I told myself. We ended up near each other by the food table for most of the afternoon in the casual, unplanned way things happen at neighborhood gatherings. We talked about Carl's increasingly elaborate charcoal technique. We talked about a new coffee shop that had opened downtown that we had both independently tried and independently found disappointing. She mentioned a student she was worried about and then stopped herself like she had shared more than she meant to. I told her about a bridge project I was finishing up in Durham. And she asked a surprisingly specific question about load distribution that told me she had actually listened to something I had mentioned months ago. That was the moment I would think about it later. That was the moment I stopped telling myself I was just observing. The afternoon stretched into early evening. People gathered their dishes and their children. Carl extinguished the coals with the ceremony of a man who takes such things seriously. Chester circled the yard looking for fallen food with the dedication of a much smaller dog than his ambition suggested. Simone helped Margaret fold the tablecloths. I stacked the folding chairs against the fence, and then everyone was gone and it was just the two of us finishing up in the yard, and she was quiet in a way that felt different from her usual quiet. She kept opening her mouth slightly like she was going to say something and then deciding not to. I noticed it but said nothing. Some things need space to arrive on their own. I was picking up the last of the paper cups near the fence when she appeared beside me, and she held out the note and she said what she said, and then she was gone. I opened it in my kitchen, standing at the counter with Chester watching me from the doorway like he understood the weight of the moment. It was only 2 sentences. I have been making excuses to be in my backyard when you are in yours. I do not know what to do about that, but I thought you should know. I read it 3 times. Then I folded it carefully and put it in the drawer beside the stove, under a takeout menu and a packet of batteries I had been meaning to use for something. I did not sleep well that night. The thing about a note like that is that it changes the way you see the time before it. All those evenings at the fence, all those small conversations, all those coincidental moments of being in the same place at the same time, I had written them off as luck and proximity. I had been careful not to want them too much because wanting things had started to feel like a door I had closed for good reason. Now I lay in the dark rethinking every one of them. There was the evening in May when she had come over the fence to tell me my garden light had gone out and I had invited her to stay for tea, and she had stayed for almost 2 hours and we had talked about books we had read as children and things we had wanted to be before we became what we were. She had wanted to be a cartographer. She had read everything she could find about maps as a girl. She still had a framed antique map of the North Carolina coast on her living room wall. She told me that she had found at an estate sale and saved up for months to buy. There was the afternoon in June when I had been carving a small wooden bird on the porch, and she had stopped on her way back from her car to watch without saying anything for several minutes and then said, "You do that like it means something," and I had not known how to answer, so I had just said, "I suppose it does." There was the evening in July when her car had not started and I had jumped it in the rain, and she had stood under the awning looking at me with an expression I had noticed and immediately talked myself out of interpreting. I had been building a map of her, I realized. The way she noticed things, the way she listened, the way she laughed at the edge of something and then pulled back. I had been noting her coordinates for months without understanding why. I thought about going over the next morning. I thought about it through 2 cups of coffee and most of a bowl of cereal. Chester watched me the whole time with the patient disappointment of an animal who knows breakfast was delayed due to human emotional confusion. I did not go over, not because I did not want to, but because something in me was afraid of moving too fast towards something I wanted too much. The divorce had taught me that wanting something badly enough could make you stop looking at it honestly. I had wanted my marriage to work so much that I had not looked clearly at the fact that it had already stopped working 3 years before it ended. I was not going to make that mistake again. So instead I did what I always do when I am trying to think. I went to my workshop and I worked on a small carved piece I had been neglecting. It was a wooden cardinal half-finished, sitting on a small wedge of branch. I had started it in the spring with no particular intention. I worked on it for 2 hours, thinking not about the note but about what it meant that she had been brave enough to write it. That was the thing I kept coming back to. She had folded that paper. She had held it through an entire afternoon. She had pressed it into my hand and walked away before she could be talked out of it. That was not nothing. That was the bravest thing I had seen anyone do in a very long time. I left a note in her mailbox that afternoon. I have been doing the same thing. I am not sure what to do about it either, but I am glad you told me. She texted me that evening, just a small emoji of a bird. And then, I thought you should know I saw the light on in your workshop this afternoon and felt better. And that was how it started, not with anything dramatic. With a wooden cardinal and 2 people who had finally admitted quietly that they had been paying attention. We were careful with each other in the weeks that followed, not distant but thoughtful. We had coffee on my porch one Saturday morning, and she told me more about her marriage, which had ended 4 years ago in a way she described as less like a collapse and more like a slow disappearance. Her ex-husband, Marcus, had been kind but fundamentally uninterested, she said, in anyone's interior life, including his own. They had been good partners in logistics and terrible partners in everything else. She said it without bitterness, which told me she had carried it long enough to set it down. I told her about Claire. About the politeness that had become a prison neither of us had been brave enough to name. She listened the way she always listened, like what you were saying was the most important thing in the room. We started having dinner together on Wednesdays, nothing formal. She would come over and sit at my kitchen table while I cooked, or I would stand at her counter while she made something. We ate simply, we talked easily. I learned she was working on a collection of short stories she had been writing for years and never shown to anyone. She learned that I had a recurring dream about a bridge I had designed in my early career that I had always secretly believed could have been more beautiful if the firm had let me. There was one evening when she picked up the wooden cardinal from my bookshelf where I had placed it after finishing it and turned it in her hands for a long time without speaking. It was small, maybe 4 inches from beak to tail, and I had spent considerable time on the feathers, which were carved in careful layered detail. You gave it feathers, she said. Cardinals have feathers, I said. She laughed. I mean, you did not have to. You could have just suggested them, but you gave it every single one. I did not answer that. But I understood what she meant, and she understood that I understood. She set the cardinal back on the shelf like she was handling something important, and something shifted between us in that quiet kitchen that I felt for days afterward. Then, in the second week of September, something changed. Her sister called from Charlotte. I heard Simone's voice through the open kitchen window while I was in the garden, not deliberately listening, but unable not to. The conversation was tense. Words like "it is not your decision" and "you do not understand what it was like" floated over the fence with the familiar weight of an old argument being resumed. When she came outside an hour later, she looked like she had aged slightly. She sat on her back porch with both hands around a glass of water and stared at the yard. I came to the fence. Do you want company or space? She thought about it. Company, she said, but quiet company. So I came over and sat in the other porch chair and we were quiet for a long time. Chester had followed me through the gate and settled at her feet with the confidence of an animal who knows where comfort is needed. After a while she said, "My sister thinks I am making a mistake." I waited. She thinks I am building a life around things that are too quiet. That I have gone so far in the direction of peace that I am missing something. What do you think? I asked. She looked at the garden. I think peace is underrated. It is, I said. And so is being known. She looked at me then, and something in her expression shifted in a way that was harder to look away from than anything she had ever said. She told me the rest of it that night, sitting at my kitchen table with the overhead light on and a pot of tea neither of us was really drinking. She told me that her sister thought she had written the note to me on impulse and was not thinking about what it could complicate. She told me that there was a reason, beyond shyness, that she had been careful. That after Marcus, she had made a specific private promise to herself about not becoming someone who leaned too hard on proximity and the comfort of being near someone familiar. She had been afraid, she said, that what she felt for me was convenience, geography, the relief of someone nearby who was decent. And then I realized something, she said quietly. What? I realized I had turned down 2 invitations to things this summer because they would have meant being somewhere else on an evening when I thought we might talk. That is not geography. That is a choice. I sat with that for a moment. I turned down a work trip to Virginia in June, I said. I told myself it was because the timing was bad with the Durham project. We looked at each other. Was it? She asked. No, I said. There was a silence that was longer than most silences I had shared with another person. But it was the comfortable kind, the kind that does not need to be filled because both people inside it already understand what it means. What came after was not easy, not immediately. Her sister Yvonne came to visit the following weekend. I saw her car in the driveway and did not expect much. But on Sunday afternoon, Simone knocked on my door and said Yvonne wanted to meet me, and her expression was careful in the way of someone who is managing 2 things at once. Yvonne was sharp and warm in equal measure. She had Simone's eyes and a directness that was either refreshing or intimidating depending on how honest you were prepared to be. She asked me about my work. She asked me how long I had lived in the house. She asked, with the precision of someone who does not waste questions, what my divorce had taught me about myself. It was the kind of question that either ends a conversation or opens one. I answered it honestly. I said it had taught me that being agreeable and being present were not the same thing. That I had confused them for a long time, and the confusion had cost both me and Claire something we had not gotten back. Yvonne nodded slowly like she was checking something against an internal list. After she left Sunday evening, Simone came over and said, "She likes you." She interrogated me, I said. "That is how she likes people," Simone said, and she smiled in a way I had not seen before. Relieved, maybe, or something that sat just next to relief. There was still one thing I did not know. In October, about 6 weeks after the barbecue, I came home to find a car I did not recognize parked in front of Simone's house. A man about my age, tall, with the deliberate posture of someone who has thought about how they appear. He was on her porch when I pulled in. I did not stop moving. I went inside and let Chester out and stood in the kitchen and told myself I had no claim on her schedule. She texted me an hour later. "That was Marcus. He is in town for work. He stopped by without asking. I did not invite him." And then, "Are you free tonight?" I was free. She came over and told me what Marcus had said. He had heard through a mutual friend that she seemed happy, and he had wanted to see it for himself, which she recognized as a form of not being able to fully let go, dressed up in the language of friendship. He had not been unkind, but he had said something that had stayed with her, that she had been happier in the last 2 months than she had been in the last 2 years of their marriage, and that he was glad for her, even if it was hard to see. He said I seemed lighter, she told me, like something had been set down. She was quiet for a moment. Then she picked up the wooden cardinal from the shelf, as she had done twice before, and this time she held it in both hands like she was deciding whether to keep holding it or put it back. I want to keep going forward, she said, but I wanted you to know that there are things I am still carrying, not him, not the marriage, just the habits of being careful. I do not always know how to trust that something good is actually good and not just the relief of not being unhappy. I know that feeling, I said. I know you do, she said. That is one of the reasons I wrote the notes. I thought about that for a long time after she left, not the part about Marcus, the part about the note. She had written it because she recognized something in me that she recognized in herself. Two people who had learned to mistake the absence of pain for the presence of something real. Two people who had become so good at being careful that they had almost missed something true. I went to my workshop that night and started on a second bird, not a cardinal. A small wooden wren which is more modest in color and more determined in nature, and which I had always thought was underestimated for both of those reasons. November came in cold and fast. We had dinner more often. We shared the small domestic rhythm of two people who have stopped pretending they are not building something. She read me a page of her stories one evening, sitting cross-legged on my couch with a notebook on her knee. And I did not speak for a long time after because it was better than anything I had expected, and I did not want to diminish it with the wrong words. I told her eventually that the bridge I wished I had built differently was one I drove over sometimes just to stand in the thing I should have pushed harder for. She said that was the saddest beautiful thing she had ever heard. Then she said you could still push for something now, and she said it plainly enough that it was about more than bridge design, and we both knew it. I gave her the wren the week before Thanksgiving, wrapped in a piece of brown paper bag with a piece of twine I cut from the workshop. She unwrapped it slowly and looked at it the way she had looked at the cardinal. Then she looked at me. "Why a wren?" she asked. "They are smaller than you expect," I said, "and more capable than they look, and they do not need anyone's attention to know their own worth." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I am going to put this next to the map. The antique map of the North Carolina coast, the one she had saved up months for. The one on her living room wall that she had told me about that evening in May when neither of us had understood what we were beginning." I helped her hang the wren on a small hook beside the frame that same evening. We stood back and looked at it together, the carved bird beside the old coastline, and something about the image stayed with me. Two things someone had thought were worth keeping. Two things that had found their way to the same wall. There is no dramatic ending to tell you, no moment where everything cracked open and we declared ourselves in the rain. Real things do not usually end that way or begin that way, and I think that was the point. What I can tell you is this. On a Saturday afternoon in March, almost 7 months after the barbecue, we were sitting on my back porch in the particular stillness of early spring when the world is just beginning to remember warmth. Chester was asleep at our feet. She had a book she was not reading. I had a cup of coffee I had let go cold. She said without looking up from the book, "I have been thinking about that note." "Which part?" I asked. "The part where I said this stays between us." I waited. "I think I was afraid," she said. "I wanted it to stay between us because if it did and you did not feel the same way, it could disappear. I could pretend it had been a small thing, a moment. Something the summer made me do, and now," I asked. She finally looked at me. "Now I think I want it to be a very big thing," she said. "And I am not afraid of that anymore." I reached over and took her hand. It was a small thing, very ordinary, the kind of gesture that looks like nothing from the outside. She looked down at our hands and then back at me and smiled in the way I had come to understand was her real smile, not the polite one she wore in the world, but the one that meant she felt safe. Chester lifted his head, regarded us with the dignified boredom of a dog who had seen this coming for months, and put his head back down. Time moves differently when you stop being afraid of it. The next year was quieter than I expected and fuller than I remembered wanting. She finished her collection of stories, and I read every one of them and told her truthfully that they were better than she knew. She started sending them out. 2 were accepted. She cried when she told me, which she immediately denied, but her eyes were very bright. I designed a small piece of furniture for her classroom, a low bookshelf at the student's height with space for the kind of books she believed children needed and the world did not always provide. She painted it blue, which had not been my first choice but which was correct. We did not rush, we did not perform. We just kept showing up for each other in the specific, daily, undramatic way that love actually works when it is not trying to prove anything. She moved into the yellow house the following spring. She brought the map, she brought the wren. She brought the dusty green station wagon and 7 boxes of books and one very confident African violet that immediately took over the kitchen windowsill and which I accepted as a member of the household without negotiation. We were married the following October in Margaret and Carl's backyard because it seemed right to use the same space where it had all started being true. Margaret cried. Carl managed the seating arrangement with the seriousness of a man coordinating a military operation, which felt appropriate. Chester wore a bow tie he tolerated for approximately 11 minutes. The cardinal and the wren sit side by side on our bookshelf now. She told me once that she liked that they were both from the same hands, but they were different, one bold, one modest. Both capable of flight. The note, the original one, is still in the drawer beside the stove. We have not thrown it away. I do not think we will. Some things earn their place by being the beginning of something you did not know you were allowed to want. What I have come to understand in the years since that August afternoon is that bravery does not always look like the things we are taught to recognize. Sometimes it is a folded square of notebook paper. Sometimes it is putting a sentence into the world and walking away before you lose your nerve. Sometimes bravery is simply admitting that you have been paying attention to someone and letting them know that what you saw was enough to risk something. Simone was brave in a way I was not ready to be yet. She showed me what it looked like, and then I had to decide if I was going to be that honest in return. I think the reason people stay quiet about these things, the real reason, is not fear of rejection exactly. It is fear of being seen. Of admitting that someone has become important to you before you have been given permission. We wait for permission that was ours all along. So if there is anything in this story worth taking with you, it might be this: the people who matter to you know you are watching. They are watching too. The question is only who will be the first to say so. Have you ever received something small that changed everything? A note, a message, a word said quietly that you knew would open a door you had been standing outside of too long. Have you ever been the person who needed to be brave first and waited, and later wondered what you were so afraid of? And if you could write that note now to someone who already knows you have been paying attention, what would it say? If this story stayed with you, I would love to know in the comments which moment felt most real to you. And if you found something here worth holding onto, please like this video and subscribe. There are more stories coming, slow and honest and human, every single week.